Sports, John Kurtz, Kansas City Sports Network, joins us on the show today. He's been on with us many, many times. So I'm watching video on your timeline of Avery Johnson throwing the football and all that. And I know that Chris Kleiman kind of gave us an update when we had him on live in Vegas, but how would you describe him on a scale of 1 to 10 as an efficient passer? And I know we haven't seen much of him, but what would you put?
Yeah, well, I appreciate you guys having me on. I mean, I think the narrative certainly that they want to push is that this is a guy that has the potential to be a 9 or a 10. I mean, look, last year he didn't throw an interception the entire time that he was out there on the field, and there were a lot of balls thrown away. I think the bowl game is a really great example of that. It's easy to get sucked into looking at what the completion percentage was, which was just under 50% in the bowl game, but he was up against a good defense and had a receiver core that, again, to me is one of the bigger question marks of this team. How can they step up for him? There weren't a lot of guys getting open against that NC State secondary, and he was just comfortable and content to throw the ball away, which speaks to his decision-making ability. But, I mean, if you go watch his high school film, like, the guy can throw the ball, and watching a little bit today of the practice footage, I mean, it jumps out of his hands. Like, he's got a live arm, and I know that it maybe digs at people around him more than him per se, but like I was reading the story that Bruce Feldman wrote about him in the Athletic/New York Times this past week, and Justin Hoover, who is a guy that runs a passing academy that Avery Johnson has been a part of and works at the Elite 11 camp. He was kind of like, man, I understand everybody gets all sucked in by the 4.3 speed, but like this guy can really throw the ball, and it's kind of annoying that nobody talks about that because they think about his speed. So there is this narrative that's developed around him because he's got ridiculous speed and athleticism that people don't really think about that fact. But I think he can absolutely beat teams with his arm. And I do think he and his camp are really, really eager to show that this year. So I have no doubts about it at all. And in fact, I mean, there are a couple of throws. If you took just a cut up of his best throws last year, I mean, there are some of them that are just beautiful. I mean, he threw one down the sideline against TCU to Jace Brown that was just a gorgeous, gorgeous play. And then speaking of the bowl game again, NC State, Jace Brown, the touchdown that really put the game away to put them up by 2 scores, kind of a slot fade to the end zone. I mean, again, just a ball that was put in exactly the right position with touch that you need it to be. So I don't have any doubts about it at all. The guy's got an elite arm. Again, I would direct you to his high school film where, you know, it's different arm angles, off balance, running around, kind of what you're seeing a lot of the quarterbacks doing these days, emulating sort of the Patrick Mahomes style of getting out of the pocket and being creative with how you deliver the ball. And I think Avery can definitely do that.
John, are you the only other person in Manhattan rolling around in a lavender purple sports car of some sort? Or is that just unique to Avery Johnson?
Man, I am not. It is unique to Avery, which it's funny to me, the commotion that came from that, because like I think people see it and assume like, oh man, like some did, you know, it's the internet, right? I get it, but used all this money to buy this car, and why are we not investing this? I'm like, guys, like this dealership has been doing this with K-State athletes for years at this point. It's a lease, like they're leasing the cars out to the kids. Like this is not him spending a whole lot of money on that. Instead, he was spending his money on setting up basically a mini retreat for he and the skill position players to go hang out and bond and work together in Kansas City this past weekend. Like he funded that and paid for that. He's getting the lease as a part of an NIL deal with the dealership. So yeah, you know, I mean, internet gonna internet, Twitter gonna Twitter. I understand, but it's a pretty sweet ride.
So Sinnott, BB, KT Leviston, Will Howard, Phillips Brooks, Khalid Duke, and Kobe Savage are all gone. And obviously, BB, and others, Leviston and others were drafted. Sinnott was drafted. How would you say, in order, are the ones they'll miss the most?
It's a good question. They love Garrett Oakley, who's going to step into the starting tight end role this year. I think what they'll question mark for me there is tight end depth and what they have. And Oakley's got to step up and prove it. But there have been whispers about him having a higher ceiling, at least as a receiving threat, than Ben Sinnott does because of the athleticism that he brings to the table. So he's definitely next in line. And they think very, very highly of him. To me, the debate is like you're listing off those guys. The debate becomes like, all right, is it Ben Sinnott, is it Cooper Beebe? I mean,
yep.
They're so good on the offensive line typically. I would say like they have such a high floor on the offensive line typically under Connor Riley. I've been using this analogy for most of the offseason, but I view Connor Riley with the offensive line kind of like I view Matt Campbell as a head coach. Like I feel like the years that you look at it and be like, man, they lost a lot. Like this could be a bit of a down year. They're typically going to overperform like Iowa State did last year and be like, man, that was actually a really solid to good group. And then some of the years where you're feeling like, man, this is going to be like one of the best units in the country. They maybe don't quite hit that ceiling, but obviously are still good. So I just trust kind of what they're going to do on the offensive line. But it's going to be a drop-off. Like, BB, not only could you move him everywhere, but wherever he's playing, he was just absolutely elite. Kobe Savage in the secondary, it's like, I get it. People look at that, hey, he left for Oregon. It's one of the examples of the transfer portal working against you these days. But, man, they love their safeties. And they have been so good at recruiting transfer defensive backs and sending them to the NFL. They've done it. They've sent 4 guys, transfer safeties to the NFL or transfer defensive backs to the NFL in the last 4 years. Like, they just do it every year. Marquise Siegel is going to be the next guy. Joe Klanderman, we just had him on our podcast, K-State's defensive coordinator. He said he would not trade him for literally any other safety in the country. And had he not dropped, he literally dropped like 4 or 5 interceptions last year, was just in the right spot, dropped them. He's getting all sorts of grief at media days about being on the jugs machine. Had he not done that, I mean, he's a guy that would be getting way more national and just Big 12 wide publicity. And Jordan Riley is a transfer that they brought in basically as a Kobe Savage kind of replacement there to fill an extra spot in the secondary. They love him. Love him. So I'm not really that concerned there either. I would honestly, I'm kind of talking myself into probably Ben Sinnott there just because he was such a stud and a reliable, productive tight end. And it's not just what he could do catching the ball, but it's also, if you go look at it, was one of Avery Johnson's 5 touchdown runs against Texas Tech. I would tell you, just go watch the Avery Johnson touchdown run against Texas Tech. Well, it's going to take you a lot of film to get through. There were 5 of them. But on one of them, Ben Sinnott was lead blocking for him, and he gets out there and literally takes out 2 Texas Tech defenders within, it was like a 5-6 yard touchdown run. And he whacked out 2 Texas Tech defenders there. So he was a great blocker too. Bigger body than what they have there with Oakley. And I do think the tight end room that's one of those positions where they're going to have to prove it. And that's kind of just a theme of the whole team. These coaches will tell you, man, we are as talented as we have been since we have been here, easily. But a lot of it is unproven talent. And they're clearly getting some benefit of the doubt because they were picked second, just barely, almost picked to win the Big 12 without a single player on the All Big 12 team. And I think a lot of that is Avery Johnson, but also just faith in this coaching staff and what they do and how they've been able to steadily build the talent through recruiting the last 3 years.
John, wide receiver wise, how confident are you in that position, which they've always managed to, kind of have some people come out of nowhere or, be very reliable. Do they have a playmaker that will help Avery Johnson in that passing game this year take that next step?
Well, Jace Brown is definitely the guy that's poised to be, I think, the best of the bunch. He's got the highest potential. Really came on at the end of last year. I mean, you go look at his numbers. He had less than 500 yards receiving. It was in the 400-yard range. He didn't play a bunch at the beginning of the year. He's a true freshman, 3-star recruit. Nobody was thinking about him at this time last year at all. He really burst onto the scene out of nowhere, and he's a great route runner. He's pretty fast, a little small, undersized, but like route running is really the thing with him. And I think he's got potential to be a dude, like a real dude, and clearly has a connection with Avery. They were in the same class. I think there's a lot to like there about him. The receiving room at large, they would tell you, and Bill Klanderman, again, another quote I'll steal from the K-State defensive coordinator. He said it's the most talent he's seen in the receiver room since he's been here. He's the guy that's got to defend it every single day. Keegan Johnson was a massive transfer haul last year that they got over like Texas A&M and Notre Dame. He had a great freshman year at Iowa a couple of years ago, but basically just couldn't stay healthy the entire year last year. So to me, I'm in, hey, I got to see it before I believe it mode, but he's drawn some hype again this offseason. He's got a sky-high ceiling of potential if he can step up and be that guy. They brought in Dante Cephas, who was a Penn State transfer. At one point, he was at Kent State in the back where he had like 1,400 yards receiving when he was working with Matthew Middlebrooks, who was his assistant coach there, is now his receivers coach at K-State. So I think K-State's hoping they can unlock what he did 2 years ago instead of a disappointing year last year with Penn State. be honest, that Penn State offense would have been hard for almost anybody to succeed as a wide receiver last year. So again, like potential there, but we haven't really seen it at this T5 level. Jaden Jackson's an Ole Miss transfer that's been around for a couple of years. Solid. Not sure how high the ceiling is necessarily there. A guy to watch out for is Trey Spivey. He's Junior Spivey's son, if you're a Major League Baseball fan. But he is, man, you look at him getting off the bus. That's an all-time, like, getting off the bus sort of dude. He looks the part. He got in a little bit last year, but he has as much athleticism and talent and skill as anybody K-State had in the receiving room in a while. It's just a matter of all the things that a freshman, now a sophomore, a guy in his second year in the program, I guess. It took the red shirt last year. But guy in his second year in the program typically should start to pick things up a little bit more. They're really hoping for that because he's a guy that I think could absolutely be a factor too. So what I've described to you is, much like the entire team, a room that they feel like has more talent than they've had since they've been here and since they got here in 2019, but a lot of players that need to step up. And I think it's fair to have a wait-and-see attitude with the receiving room because, frankly, since Tyler Lockett left in 2014 and they had 2,000-yard receivers that year with Tyler Lockett and Curry Sexton, it's always, I feel like the receiver room has always left a little something to be desired for the most part. So they're going to have to prove it to me this year, but they do have some bodies that are certainly capable.
So we've seen this trend where former head coaches go and join other staffs as analysts, consultants, what have you, and sometimes as just full-blown assistant coaches. You got Gary Patterson and Baylor, obviously, as an example. We talked yesterday about TCU and the additions that they've made, like Dana Holgerson. But what's been the early return on Matt Wells being on staff? I know he's been on staff since the beginning of the year, but the former Texas Tech head coach, really well-respected. What kind of an imprint has he already left so far to this point?
Yeah, I mean, he's a guy that goes back a ways with Chris Kleiman. I can remember asking Kleiman at Big 12 Media Days in like 2021 maybe, who he was tightest with among Big 12 coaches there, and he said Matt Wells. So those are guys, immediately when the job came open, I thought, like, all right, Matt Wells is definitely going to be somebody that's on the radar here. And I think he gets a lot of flack around the Big 12 because Tech fans hated him as a head coach.
Right.
I mean, there's a lot that you have to do as like a CEO, head coach type, and that you don't have to do when he's not even K-State's offensive coordinator. He's the co-offensive coordinator and quarterbacks coach. So if you're parsing it down to that sort of a level, I feel like his track record is actually pretty good in college football with that. And it seems like Avery Johnson has really taken a liking to him. I think the part that is really nice, as I view it, is that he's a guy who's obviously called plays before, run an offense, run an entire team. And when you have Connor Riley taking over as the guy who actually has the full title of offensive coordinator, I like having the experience of Matt Wells there to be able to kind of guide him through that. Plus, you think of Connor Riley, he's an offensive line coach. They're going to need to throw the ball, and I know Connor Riley fully believes in that. They want to throw the ball with Avery Johnson, but you would think of him being a guy that's going to be geared more toward the run, right? You can have Matt Wells be able to develop passing concepts. I think they'll have the ability to do a lot between those two, and that Matt Wells fills a nice void here when you needed a little bit more experience, at least for me to feel fully comfortable with what's going on at offensive coordinator. So I think that's the good of it. That's the part that I like. And I think there is a lot of potential there. Is there as much potential there as Colin Klein, who clearly was a rising star in the coaching profession? It's why he's in the SEC at Texas A&M right now. And it's why, statistically, K-State's offense the last 2 years, that's as good a 2-year run offensively as K-State has had since Bill Snyder's first go-around, basically. It was, I think even last year, some of the frustration fans had with, some Will Howard turnovers and things. If you really go look at the offense, points per drive, particularly how often they were scoring, I think that offense was even underrated the last couple of years, how good it was with Colin Klein. So there very well could be a bit of a drop-off in terms of what you have there at coordinator. But I think internally the program feels like they've just kept on moving and everything's headed in the right direction.
All right, John, we know you do the podcast and do a lot with the Kansas City Sports Network, but I saw the pinned tweet on your timeline about this Big 12 newsletter and a way for people to get Big 12 information through the lens of someone who covers the Big 12 rather than what is kind of a piecemeal. Tell everybody, go ahead and give everybody a chance to know more about that.
Yeah, hey, I really appreciate that. I literally, one just went out at about 5:15 earlier today. So I've had this little less than a month. We've got 1,500 plus subscribers now. So if you want to join 1,500 plus other Big 12 fans who are reading this a couple times a week, I would really appreciate it. It's called Open for Business, obviously aptly named. We hear Brett Yormark talk about that quite a bit. He has said that numerous times. Feels like every time he gets a mic up in front of everybody at Big 12 Media Days. And I wanted to look, if you're a college football fan out there right now and you're from Big 12 country, if you're trying to read ESPN, CBS, the national reporters, even if you're going to guys like Josh Pate, who I really like, for college football content on the internet, you're generally getting everything first through a Big Ten and SEC sort of filter. Like everybody's kind of filtering the news through, all right, what's it mean for the two conferences that we care about the most nationally? Then we'll kind of get to, whatever is going to be there for the Big 12. You might hear about a Big 12 team or two. Well, this is filtering everything through a Big 12 lens, right? That's what I care about. That's generally what I'm covering. I mean, I'm going a little bit broader with the scope of college football, but I'm a Big 12 guy, and that's what I've known. I was in attendance at the first Big 12 football game in 1996 between K-State and Texas Tech, August 31st, 1996. So that's what I know and love. That's the league I cover. So I'm going to give you the headlines there. I'm going to give you my analysis. I took an anonymous player survey at the Big 12 Media Days that I've been leaking out there in the newsletter here over the first couple of weeks. So it's a ton of good stuff. The reviews have been great so far, so I would appreciate it if you go sign up. OFBnews.com is how you can sign up for that, OFBnews.com. Or if you'd prefer, like Smokey just said, you can go find my Twitter account at Kurtz. It's the pinned tweet there. It's got a link. So OFBnews.com to sign up for Open for Business.
All right, man. Good luck with it. Congratulations on the idea and vision, and we appreciate you. Thank you very much. Have a great week and weekend, and here we go. Less than, 3 weeks away from the opening of the season, and can't wait.
Yes, sir. Anytime, guys. Thank you.
Thank you. That's John Kurtz, Kansas State, but also he does do a great job of covering the Big 12 and was one of those that during all with the twisting and turning of post-Texas and Oklahoma and then all the stuff with the Pac-12, he was able to filter through the BS and give his own opinion without being swayed one way or the other, and does a really good job.